Thank you. I don't know what that's all about, but thanks. Make me feel good. So, welcome to everybody and those who are watching online. You know, there's something about summer that just, is dear in my heart. It's not the mowing, but it is the sunshine and the warmth, and I don't have to wear a coat. And we're now at a holiday weekend that for me was always kind of depressing. We get here to this point and I'm thinking, okay, October, November, and snow. And I get really depressed. But today it's a little bit different because I get to share the good news today. And so this is a great weekend. And this is Labor Day weekend, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful? We get to celebrate Labor Day. So tomorrow is Labor Day officially. So how many of you are going into labor tomorrow? No, nobody? Well, anyway, I was going to talk about labor. And I thought, I think I need to break the rules. So I'm going to break the rules this morning, and I'm not going to talk about labor, although I may touch on it a little bit, okay? How can you share something and not have a little bit of labor involved, right? Right? Yeah. You go out and share, it's a little bit of a labor. It's a labor of what? Love, yeah. I got to tell you a story. There was a guy, he stood there staring up at the sky, and he couldn't believe his eyes. He just couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was as if he was seeing the sky for the first time. And I guess in a way he was. It didn't matter that it was the same old sky he'd always looked at. He was seeing it from a whole new perspective. Actually, he was seeing it through a hole in the roof. Yeah. I got a hole in my roof. And we're going to be fixing that real quick. But anyway, do you remember the story about the time Jesus went to Peter's home and the word had gotten out that he was there, and so people started gathering and they gathered to hear him and just to see the one who dared to call himself the Messiah. You remember that story? Mm-hmm. Well, the crowd grew so large that you couldn't get near the door. Wouldn't that be nice if that happened here? The crowd got so large that you couldn't get into the doors. I think that'd be wonderful. We'd have to go to 2 services again, wouldn't we, Pastor? Yeah. But into that crowd came 4 men. And they were carrying a paralyzed man on a stretcher. Well, they quickly decided that they weren't going to get through the crowd, so they took their friend up on the roof of Peter's home. And they tore a hole in the roof. They dug through the clay and lowered their friend down to Jesus. And when Jesus saw their devotion to their friend, he healed the guy who was paralyzed. And that's the basic story. So, I'm done. Oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm just getting started. But out of that basic story comes 4 characteristics. And it's characteristics those men had, characteristics that we would do well to emulate today. Number 1 was their love. If you read through your New Testament, you'll discover that Jesus didn't come to lay down new commandments. He simply refined and clarified the old commandments. But Jesus did manage to leave us with one new commandment. You might even say there's more. But the one commandment I'm talking about is found in John 13:34. It says, "So now I am giving you a commandment." Pretty obvious, huh? Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. So number 2 was their dream. These 4 guys had a dream of what could happen if Jesus just touched their friend. If he just reached out and touched their friend. They had a dream of what would happen to him. They knew that if Jesus wanted to, he could heal their friend and he'd be able to walk again. And if we're going to accomplish the things that need to be accomplished in this life, we'll first have to dream of the way it could be. Remember, if you don't build castles in the air, you won't build anything on the ground. And just because it's never been done doesn't mean it can't be done. I mean, think about all the things that we have, luxury items today, electronic, technical things. They were once just a dream. They were once a dream on the TV shows at late night. So, even though it's never been done before, it doesn't mean that it can't be done. But you do have to see it before you can do it. You have to have the vision before you can map it out, before you can build it. You have to leave the realm of what is and venture down the path of what could be. Third comes their commitment. What are you willing to do to achieve that dream? What are you willing to do to achieve your dream? These 4 men, they could have been doing any number of things that didn't involve carrying a man on a stretcher across town in the soaring heat of summer. Excuse me. There could have been any number of things that didn't involve climbing a ladder and tearing a hole in the roof. And then number 4 was their cooperation. It took all 4 of them working together to get the job done. One couldn't have done it. You think you could carry a paralyzed man and climb a ladder and put him on the roof and then lower him down all by yourself? No. 2 couldn't have done it. And 3, it would have been tough, really tough to get it done. Instead, it took 4 people working in concert to get the job done. Throughout the New Testament, Paul compares the church to a body. The body is made up of different parts, doing different things, but all functioning for the common good. Also, in Christ's last prayer, John 17, verses 22 and 23, we find these words: "I have given them the glory you gave me, so they may be one as we are one. I am in them, and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me." Now, I truly believe that Encounter is a loving church. I do. But that's not to say that we can't become more loving, because we can. We can never be too loving. And we can't stop loving people. Why? because you can't store or bank love for a later use. Love is, love was, love is yet to come. If we're to continue to be all that God wants us to be, then we are obligated to continue to love people. It's a labor of love. Heard that phrase before? Yeah? And I believe that we, the people of Encounter, have a dream. Do you have a dream? Do you have a dream for your family? But the big question for me is, do you have a dream for this church? Or do you just come? But not just a dream for this church, but a dream of touching lives and changing our nation. I mean, if all the churches got together and they started doing these things, we would make a huge difference in the way our nation operates, in the way our nation thinks, in the way that our nation does things. We have a dream of seeing people introduced to Jesus. A dream of seeing the difference he can make in the lives of people and families. And I know that we share in that determination. It's a determination that began with the group who committed themselves to planting this church. And it continues with all those who are here every Sunday taking part in ministry. And yes, you can see it in our staff. Because if they were in it for the money, they certainly wouldn't be here. Yeah. I mean, I get paid a lot for doing this. Every time I preach, I get a raise. I go from 0 to a bigger 0. Isn't that nice? Yeah. But as a church, we're united, and you can sense that unity within the body here. I mean, you can. And as a church, we've caught the vision for what God would have us to do and where God would have us to go. And we're pushing in that direction. And many of us, if not most of us, are sharing in that sacrifice. But we aren't going to talk about those things this morning, because this is Labor Day weekend. We can't talk about labor on Labor Day weekend, can we? No. I mean, that'd be following the rules. I'm being a bit of a renegade today. My wife would probably tell you I'm a renegade every day. But today there is another question that must be asked. We know who kicked the hole in the roof because, well, I just told you. And I suspect most of us here have read about that somewhere. I think there's a book that has that story in it. It's called the Bible. But we now have another question that must be answered, and it's this. Who fixed the hole in the roof? Who fixed the hole in that roof? Never considered that, did you? I mean, it's kind of something that gets overlooked in the story. Who fixed the roof? I mean, they ruined Peter's roof. Didn't it ever bother you that when all the excitement died down and the paralyzed man and his friends, they walked away? That when the crowd left puzzled and the scribes left angry and Jesus and the disciples were through, doesn't it bother you that there was still a great big gaping hole in the roof? So that's the question, isn't it? Who fixed the hole? Who took the time to patch the roof? I mean, someone had to. Didn't fix itself. Although that would be a great thing, wouldn't it? Yeah. Sometimes it's easy to get so caught up in all the excitement that we forget the mundane, those everyday things that make up life. We come to church, the music seems to take us into the throne room of God. And I do love the worship here. I like the music. You know, I don't stand because I save my strength, because sometimes I have a hard time standing a long time. But, you know, I love the music. I rock to the music. I sing. Sometimes I sing to myself because, you know, I got to save my voice. I got all kinds of excuses, don't I? Holy mackerel. You know, I was taught not to make excuses in the Army. I think I've forgotten that training. But we come into this church, and the messages, they memorize us, at least until we walk out the door. And the fellowship, it's incredible. But that's not life. That's church. When paralytics walk and the blind see, it's a wonderful thing. That's wonderful stuff. But there will come a time in our life when the roof needs patching, and somebody's going to have to do it. Now, before we can discover who fixed the roof, we can probably narrow it down quite a bit by talking about who didn't fix the roof. See, I told you I wasn't going to talk about labor. I know the curious didn't do it. These people wouldn't be involved in that kind of work. They were only there to see what was happening. You know, you get curious, you drive by an accident and you're, oh, sorry, I ran into you. Right? How many got rubbernecks? Yeah. I didn't see any hands. Afraid to tell me. So the curious didn't do it. They were attracted not by Christ, nor by his teaching, or even by his life. They were attracted because he said, I am God. I am. And they had never seen anyone who called himself God before. So, that's the curiosity of things. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, curiosity? You can tell the average person that there are 10,987,654,321 stars in the sky, and they'll believe you. But if the sign says wet paint, they got to check it out. Find out for themselves, and then they're looking at it. See? And so the first group of people were there to satisfy their curiosity, not because of Jesus. I think they'd be just as quick to rush down the street to see a monkey riding a bicycle. And no, I don't think they'd be all that interested in fixing the roof. The next group we'll call the naysayers. But the naysayers didn't do it. They didn't do it. This kind of people, they're not interested in building up the kingdom. They'd rather blow it up. No, they weren't there to help, only to hinder. The only way they would have fixed the roof is if they thought that they could somehow damage Jesus' reputation by doing it. And there are still people like that in the world today. Unfortunately, and this is a little secret, some of them, well, you can't hear me, some of them are in the church. A lot of churches are filled with naysayers. These people haven't learned that knockers belong on doors, not in churches. So don't be knocking the pastor's sermons, and don't be knocking our guests' sermons. Am I scolding you? Do you feel scolded yet? Wait till I'm done. You'll be kicking me out of the church. You know the type. They'd have you write it, sing it, play it, paint it, carve it, or preach it. But the only way they would do it is to do it the way they would do it. That makes sense. The only way they would do it, the only way they would acknowledge it, is if it's done the way they want it done. Yeah. And the one thing we know about critical people is that they're more interested in imparting their valuable knowledge than they are in helping. I think they could learn a thing or two from a mule. A mule knows that you can't kick and pull at the same time. So if the mule is pulling you and he stops, watch out. And to continue this mix of metaphors, it's very difficult to row and rock a boat at the same time. Yeah. No, the critics, they're too busy issuing dissertations on the proper methods of roof construction rather than to repairing it. That's just the way it is with the naysayers. Well, then there's the bunny believers. Bunny believers didn't do it. Now, bunny believers are folks who hop around from one church to another. They're sincere believers, but they really aren't interested in contributing to the work. Kind of like the family that got home after church and were having roast preacher for dinner. How many of you have ever had roast preacher for dinner? Oh, don't shake your head no at me. Anyway, one of their teens in that group observed it all, and he remarked, well, what do you expect for a buck? You know? Put a buck in the offering plate, listen to the preacher, go home, criticize him, and yeah, bunny hoppers. Now, I got a little bit of Irish in me. A little bit. And I kind of feel like the Irishman who wrote to the local paper and said, if you continue to make disparaging remarks about the Irish being cheap, I shall cease to borrow your newspaper. Now this may or may not be a little off the subject, but you know, I get right excited when I go into a city that still has parking meters, and I find a parking meter that has 10 or 15 minutes on it. Yeah, isn't that a great thing? You can get free parking. Yeah, I think that's a little Irish in me too. But I don't get too impressed when people come to church and they park on somebody else's nickel. If you get what I'm saying. Bunny believers kind of bounce around, never making a commitment to any one church. They don't get involved. They never give more than just a tip. If the church had to rely on them for anything, there would be no church. We couldn't keep the building open. Oh, and you'll always find the bunny believers where there's free spiritual food, or free food for that matter. Seems that they're always taking and never giving back. And to illustrate, there was a story told of a dear sainted grandmother. She was almost 90 years old when she passed. And for the last 15 years of her life, she was a self-professed church tramp. Anybody know any church tramps? I'm a church trump myself. But if there was something going on in a church, and it didn't matter what church, she was there. This lady was there. But when Sunday morning came, she and her money were at her regular church, which was Baptist, by the way. Another characteristic of the bunny believers, I'm getting chuckled here. Another characteristic of the bunny believers is that they're usually all wound up and excited. Yeah? They always want to tell you about the last singer they heard sing, or the last speaker they heard speak, and how great the worship was at this or that church, or how great the preacher was at that other church. Yeah. They talk a good talk, but they don't get much done. Bunny believers look like they're doing a lot. I mean, they're all excited, and they talk a good show, but they don't fix any roofs. When I was 14 years old, I got a job stacking beer at a small beer warehouse in the town we lived in. And one day my friend, who we went together and got this job, we were working, stacking the beer up. We had to stack it way up to the ceiling practically. And he pointed at one of the regular company workers, because we were just summer help. And he said, "Hey, watch old Jimmy J over there." And so as I worked, I tried to keep my eye on him. And every time I seen Jimmy, he seemed to have a broom in his hand or a box in his arms with a few broken bottles in it, or whatever. But I never saw Jimmy sweeping the floor. And I never saw him go to the dumpster. He put on a good show. He was always looking busy. Friends, it's not how high you jump or how loud you shout. Oh, by the way, if my dad had known, he wouldn't have approved where I was working, just so you know. But it doesn't matter how high you jump or how loud you shout. It's how straight you walk when you hit the ground. Now, I have nothing against jumpers and shouters. When we're in praise and worship, I don't care if you jump and shout and carry on and love Jesus out loud. But I'd trade a whole handful of jumpers and shouters for a quiet worker. One who gets the job done. Now, if you can jump and shout and work, oh man, that's a bonus. You'd like lots of those, wouldn't you? Yeah, yes, the pastor is supposed to be shaking his head right now. Yes. Instead, he's sitting there grinning at me. Sorry to pick on you. But I just love to do it. But to continue, the pew warmers didn't do it. This is the week-to-week crowd. The people were there whenever Jesus preached. They were solid followers, but they only cared for themselves and maybe their own. They wouldn't even move to let the poor crippled man in. I mean, here's this crowd, and they won't let the guy be brought in to Jesus because they're too busy being part of this preaching. It was their lack of compassion and love that they were carrying. It was their lack of compassion and love that compelled those four men to dig a hole in the roof. Have you ever heard of sacrificial pew sitting? Let's see, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 that are doing sacrificial pew sitting back there. I'm not picking you out of the crowd. I'm just trying to give an illustration. But I think you know what I mean. The back rows tend to fill up first. Although it's not quite true in this church. I see a lot of people come to the front and try to sit up front. It's kind of like two groups. You got the front sitters and the back sitters, and they got the pews in the middle that are empty. Those are the visitors' chairs, you know. I call them pews, but they're chairs. I'm in a sanctuary. What do you expect? It goes kind of like this. Oh, but Pastor, when you sit in the front, you get a crick in your neck. And if I was sitting in the middle, what would I do if I had to get out? Well, my guess is that you'd do the same thing if you were at a movie and sat in the middle. You'd get up and shuffle out, excuse me, and you'd go off to do what you're going to do, get a drink or whatever. And then you'd shuffle back in and sit down next to your loved one. You do go to the movie with your loved one, don't you? Yeah. And here's another thing to think about. Wouldn't it be better for you to get a crick in your neck than a guest? Mm-hmm. Perhaps one who hadn't been in church for, say, 20 years, but was persuaded to come and try out Encounter. Many years ago, there was a young woman who was a church member, and she spoke about her 26-year-old brother. He hadn't darkened the door of a church for 10 years. It's kind of like my father-in-law. I don't think he darkened the door of a church for like 40 years. But this guy had decided to try out the new preacher after being prompted by his sister. Trouble was, he arrived a little late, and there wasn't any parking spots available, so he left. He didn't come in. He just left. The believers there took the very best parking spots. They may have saved themselves a little bit of a walk, but they might have cost this gal's brother his eternity over a parking spot. No, I think maybe I'll be parking on the far side from now on. I mean, this is challenging me too. And looking ahead, I'd like to be sure that there are spots close up in the parking lot for newcomers. And maybe, hopefully, at some point, some of us will have to park over in the Spectrum lot because we need it for the visitors and the newcomers and those who are just getting to know Jesus. You know? I mean, that's what we do here, right? We invite people in, they come, and we start sharing the good news about Jesus, and we start teaching them the way of life in Christ. So hopefully, one day we'll end up parking over there in the Spectrum lot. Wouldn't that be a blessing? And for those of us who like the back rows, and me included, I usually sit back there so I can kind of keep an eye on things. If somebody jumps up and tries to do something naughty, I can get them and maybe stop them from hurting somebody. You know, I've heard of churches that guns had come in and they started going off. So I'd kind of like maybe I can get a jump on a guy. So I like to sit in that chair that's all the way back by the door. But, you know, I might have to save it for a newcomer. One who's really bashful. I don't know. So, we all may need to sit further to the front. So there's room behind you for those late newcomers. No, I don't think the average attender would have fixed the roof. I really don't. I'm not even sure that it was the original four. They didn't do it. I mean, think about it. Why wouldn't they fix the roof? Well, it's because it's a whole lot easier getting things done while the excitement is running high. You know, we can do a lot more in anticipation of a good time than we can after we've had that good time. How many people have been through that whole process? Probably more so before you were a Christian than after. Surely you've noticed that people are a lot more eager to decorate for a special occasion than they are about helping with the cleanup afterwards. Yeah. Does anyone here love to cook? Oh, I got to put my hand down. I don't love to cook. Because, you know, that's just not me. My wife tries to get me to cook, and every once in a while I'll do it. But she hates to cook, too. So how many love to cook? Let me see those hands again. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not very many cooks out there. I guess you won't spoil the broth, will you? And yet, like many cooks, I don't get excited about cleaning up after the meal. Don't like it. Of course, it's a lot easier now. It's just me and Janie most of the time. So, and when the kids do come, guess who gets to clean up? In all probability, I don't think those 4 men had a conscious thought about whether or not to fix the hole in the roof. I think they were just so excited that Fred, we'll call him Fred, they were just so excited that Fred could walk. You know? I mean, that would be exciting. How would you like it if somebody lowered somebody in front of our pastor and he put hands on him and he healed them, he got up and he danced out of here? We'd all be excited. We'd all be dancing with him, heading out the door, wouldn't we? Yeah. I mean, that's what miracles are all about, getting excited and seeing the power of God. It's great stuff. And so they were all excited to get him home and to show him off to their friends and family and all of that, you know, put him in the parade and throw ticker tape paper on him and all that. But yet, I still don't know who fixed the hole. Thomas, he probably doubted that it happened at all. And Judas, he probably complained about how much it was going to cost. I mean, that's what my wife hears from me. And John and James, well, they were most likely fighting over who would be mentioned first in the article that was going to hit the paper. You know. But somehow, someone looked up and they saw this need and they filled it. And I don't think they put up a big sign announcing that they were doing it. You know, you see these builders out there, they're going to build something, they stick a big sign, future home of, whatever. I don't think whoever fixed that roof did that. They seen the need, they filled it. I mean, Joseph of Arimathea, he gave up his tomb for Christ on a moment's notice. Noah worked for 125 years building a boat, and they called it an ark. It was a big boat. I think we'd call it a ship. Or no, we'd probably call it a barge because it didn't have engines. And it took the Acts. In the book of Acts, Stephen and Philip were willing to wait on tables. How many have you done that? It takes special people to love and have the dream, to have the commitment, the cooperation to knock down holes or to knock out holes in the roof. But we also need people with selfless love and quiet determination who will fix that roof as well. We need the type of people who minister in a dozen different ways. People just like you. People who greet people when they come through the door. People who provide coffee. People who pray for the pastor during the service. Not before, but during the service. People who work in the big backyard, God's big backyard. People who will join in the worship team, leading us in music and song, getting us to that throne of God. And the list goes on and on and on. I'm talking about people who, if they're walking across the parking lot and they see a little piece of litter, they bend over and pick it up. I'm talking about people who write a check every week so the mortgage and the salaries get paid and the lights stay on. You know, I've noticed that after every potluck or event that happens here at the church, there are always those who say their goodbyes and thank you for a wonderful meal, and they leave. And yet there are those who are quietly putting things away. Nobody said anything to them. They just start doing it. They're putting away chairs and tables. They're cleaning up. You know, they wash down the counters, they wash off the tops of the tables before the guys can get them put away. I've noticed because I haven't been one of them. But I've noticed. They didn't do it for the glory and recognition. They do it because they love Jesus and they enjoy encounter. They know those things have to get done, so they just do it. They just get up and do it. And kudos to them. Stephen R. Covey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, wrote, "Without involvement, there is no commitment. Mark it down, asterisk it, circle it, underline it. No involvement, no commitment." That's what he said. So to be blunt, if you want to show your commitment, don't just talk about it. Get involved. Do something. Anything. Sit up front and park a little further away from the door. Offer to help with something, anything. What would it take for you to help out in the backyard, or to help put on coffee, or clean up afterwards? What would it take for you to be part of this church in a tangible way? In a, should I say it, in a Labor Day way? How hard would it be to greet people as they enter the church? The big question is, what's in your heart to do here at Encounter? What is it that's in your heart to provide love, compassion, knowledge, trust to a new person who walks through the door? Would you pray? Father in heaven, we thank you for this message. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for all the things that you have done here and around us. You have provided us with a beautiful church, a great facility, a great pastor and staff. There are the fellowship is great. But we ask you to touch our hearts and help us to do more. Encourage us today, Father. Encourage us in the coming days about what is it that we are going to do beginning this Labor Day. In Jesus' name, amen. And you are dismissed.